Before the murder of King Duncan, Macbeth could be described as a noble and loyal war hero. He respected Duncan and was happy with just being a thane. However, after the witch's prophecies, Macbeth becomes obsessed with the idea of becoming king. Although he initially decides not to give in to the temptation, Lady Macbeth persuades and manipulates him to go through with the murder. The regicide of King Duncan was a major event that began Macbeth's downfall and led to its loss of identity. After the murder, Macbeth becomes overwhelmed with guilt and anxiety. He has frequent hallucinations and cannot hide his emotions. He gradually becomes a tyrant who no longer feels any sympathy for his victims. He kills Banquo and the whole castle of Macduff without feeling a shred of guilt. At this point, Macbeth is doing whatever it takes to maintain his title as King of Scotland. His transformation from a noble thane to a cold-hearted killer demonstrates the theme of loss of identity in the play. In the Garden of Eden, Eve was persuaded by the snake to eat the forbidden fruit. She was promised that it would give her eternal knowledge and make her as powerful as God. Although Eve lived a happy life inside the garden, the temptation to eat the apple steered her down the wrong path. Taking the forbidden fruit was a moment that marked the loss of innocence for Eve. As a result of this sin, Eve was banished from the garden, where she could never return. Much like eating the apple from the garden, killing Duncan caused Macbeth to lose his innocence. Tempted by the idea of becoming powerful, he lost who he once was. In The Vanishing Princess, the story is focused on a princess who is locked inside a tower. She has never seen the outside world, and she isn't really curious about life outside the tower. Since she has never eaten food, she has no need for it, and since she has never seen herself, she does not even know she exists. Because of this, she is essentially a blank canvas. When the two soldiers come to the tower, they begin to build up an identity for her. She is given a sense of time as well as a sense of self-awareness. They bring her a mirror so she can see herself, as well as a calendar so she can keep track of time. Gradually, she begins to believe that she exists. However, just as easily as the build-up, they begin to take her down. Bit by bit, they scratch her image out of the mirror. They do this until the point where the image is completely gone and she can no longer see herself. Once the mirror is scratched out, the soldiers stop visiting her. She once again is alone and has no idea who she is. Not only does she lose her identity, but she also completely disappears physically. Before she vanishes, she says, "I'm not here. Perhaps I never was." The Jenga tower crumbling down piece by piece was meant to represent the princess's identity slowly being taken apart. The tower is built up and eventually destroyed. Every time you remove a Jenga block from the stack, it gets weaker. Much like the way the soldiers scratched the body parts into the princess, eventually the Jenga tower falls and nothing is left, symbolizing the loss of identity of the princess. The last text that demonstrates the theme of loss of identity is the yellow wallpaper. In this short story, the main character is suffering from postpartum depression. She is locked in a room away from her newborn child, and her husband John forbids her to leave the house. Although she believes it would be good for her condition, she is also not allowed to write. As a result of this, her condition worsens until eventually she has a complete breakdown. Her mental illness, over-controlling husband, and inability to write are all major factors that contribute to her loss of identity. Contrary to what her husband believes, the narrator says, "Personally, I believe that congenial work with excitement and change would do me good." This quote shows how the narrator wishes she wasn't so isolated and controlled by her husband. Being locked in a room with nothing to do except sleep will inevitably change you as a person. In this case, it took her away her individuality and made her feel depressed. Not being able to write left her with no way to express herself. A pencil with no lead has no purpose. It's unable to do what it needs to, making it completely useless. A broken pencil that cannot write has no uniqueness. It is simply a piece of wood. The broken pencil symbolizes the narrator and her loss of identity. It is meant to show how her individuality and purpose have been lost. In addition to this, the pencil could also represent her inability to write, since a broken pencil physically prevents you from writing. I chose this as a symbol because I believe it can represent how the narrator feels and her loss of identity.